My name is Helen. I am 78 years old, and the morning after I signed the papers, I woke up with a steady heart, like a clock that finally found its rhythm again, even if the house felt too quiet for a woman who once cooked for a family of 6 and laughed until the pans rattled. I kept the new will and the trust documents in a fireproof folder, tucked under my bed like a shield I could touch with my toes when fear tried to creep in at night, because fear likes the dark more than anything. But I didn't know then how quickly that fear would learn my name again. I dressed slowly, cardigan, soft shoes, small gold earrings I've had since my wedding day, and I made tea the way Richard taught me, letting the steam kiss my face until the mirror on the opposite wall fogged and made me look like a stranger. The first sip warmed the inside of my chest, and for a moment I believed peace could be simple. Then my phone buzzed on the counter, and my daughter's name lit up blue. I let it ring until it snapped to voicemail, because I knew her voice would carry his words, not hers. But I didn't expect the message that waited for me. "Mom," Claire said, too bright, too smooth, "we're swinging by later today. Gavin wants to help you organize your finances. You know how confusing online banking can be." Her laugh scratched at the last word, and I pictured him standing right there, necktie loose, jaw tight, coaching her like a little TV news anchor. "We'll bring lunch," she added, as if kindness was a sauce they could pour over control and call it love. I saved the voicemail and pressed the phone to my apron until my heartbeat steadied again, but I didn't know they were already making a plan while I was still wiping the counter. I called Miss Parker, my lawyer, who doesn't waste words and doesn't shake hands unless she wants to, and told her what I feared was coming. "2 steps ahead, Helen," she said, like it was a blessing. "I filed copies with the court and the bank last night. And I have your video statement on a secure drive, time-stamped, clear audio, you reading the terms line by line." I could hear keys tapping in the background. She works like a storm, fast and loud and focused. "If they try anything, you call me first, not after," she said. "And keep your door locked until you decide to open it." I promised I would, but I didn't know that a locked door can still open if the knocking is hard enough. Before lunch, Robert called. He never says hello first. He always begins with a weather report because he thinks small talk is a polite path to real talk. "Bit of a chill, Helen," he said. "You got your porch light fixed?" I told him it still flickered sometimes and felt old like me, and he laughed happily because he likes to fix what flickers. "I can come by this afternoon," he offered. "Bring some bulbs and that blowtorch for the weeds by the fence." I told him not to bother, said I had company coming, and he got quiet. "Do you want me there?" he asked gently. "I can sit in the driveway and pretend to read the newspaper." I stared at the plant by the sink, the leaves leaning toward the light like they were ashamed of their need. "Maybe," I said, "maybe just call me in an hour and keep me honest." I didn't know how much I would need his voice to measure my courage. At 1 o'clock, their car pulled up, music thumping like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the house, and I watched them get out as if I were sitting in the audience of a play I'd already seen. My daughter walked ahead, eyes on her phone. Gavin lagged behind, carrying a laptop bag like a trophy. He didn't knock right away. He looked into the window first and made a little face, like the curtains offended him. When he finally knocked, it wasn't with his knuckles, it was with the hard side of his ring, each tap a tiny clang. I stood behind the door and counted to 10, and then I counted to 10 again, and only then did I turn the lock. I didn't know the first thing they'd try to change wouldn't be my money. It would be my memory. "Hi, Mom," Claire said, stepping in too close, too fast. She smelled like lemon lotion and nerves. "We brought salad." She held up a plastic bowl, with little droplets sweating on the lid. Gavin didn't offer a smile. He offered the laptop bag. "Let's get you squared away," he said, already walking toward my kitchen table like he owned the map of my life. I set the salad in the fridge and wiped my hands on a towel while he opened the computer and slid a document toward me. "This is a simple, durable power of attorney," he said, voice soft as sneaky rain, "so we can help with your accounts, you know, day-to-day stuff." He tapped the final page, where a yellow flag read "Sign here." "It's for your safety," he added, "because people who take always say it's to keep you safe." I didn't know my refusal would set fire to their patience. "No," I said, and the word surprised me with its weight. It did not wobble. It did not apologize. It stood like a chair you don't move for guests who refuse to sit. Claire blinked once, twice, like a camera trying to focus. Mom, she tried again. This is normal. Everyone does this. Gavin nodded, like a little metronome. We can call a notary, he said, already reaching for his phone. 5 minutes away. I set my palm on the paper and pushed it back. No, I said again, and watched the color rise under his collar. I didn't know the next thing he would reach for wouldn't be the phone, it would be the past. You remember when we helped you move after Dad died? He said, fake gentle, not a question. We did everything for you, Helen. He used my name like a warning. We saved you, really. Claire stared at the wood grain of the table like maybe she could fall in. Mom, she whispered, and her voice was so small I couldn't tell if it was a trap or a child. It's confusing out there. She meant life. She meant me. I am not confused, I said, and I slid a folded letter across to them. The doctor's evaluation from last week, the one Miss Parker told me to get quietly. I am competent. I read, because sometimes the truth needs your voice in it. I understand my assets and my choices. The room went still except for the refrigerator hiccuping behind me. I didn't know they had packed a second plan in that laptop bag. Gavin flipped to a new tab, but kept his eyes on me. Then sign this instead, he said, and pushed forward a family banking agreement that looked friendly, curved letters, soft blue logo, bullets that sounded like pillows. Clause 7 gave him full transfer rights. Clause 8 gave him access to the safe deposit box. Clause 9 said disputes would be decided by family council, which meant him. It's standard, he murmured, like a lullaby for a baby he wanted to steal. No, I said for the third time, and the word grew brighter, like a candle taught itself to shout. I didn't know the sound that came next would be laughter, real laughter, hungry laughter, the kind that has teeth. She can't use that money anymore, he said, exactly the way he'd said it at dinner. Only this time there was no roast chicken to hide my shaking. Claire didn't laugh, not this time. She pressed her lips together hard enough to turn them white. We're trying to help, she said, but her voice didn't climb high enough to reach the truth. Gavin stood and adjusted his cuffs like he was getting ready for a meeting. We'll come back with someone who can explain this to you, he said, and then he looked me right in the face for the first time all afternoon. And you'll sign. I watched them go down the steps. I watched the car back out too fast. I watched the little boy across the street freeze mid-scooter until it passed. I didn't know I had only a small window before someone knocked on my door. When they were gone, the house swelled with a silence that wasn't mine. I opened the fridge, took out the salad, and ate it standing up with a fork like I was too late for a train I didn't want to catch. Then Robert called, right on time like we'd planned it. How's the porch light? He asked, and the question felt like a hand on my shoulder. Flickering, I said, and then I told him everything. The papers, the no, the laughter. On the line, he breathed out slowly, the way he does when he's prayerful and angry at once. I can be there in 10, he said. I'll bring a friend. I pictured him with that old tackle box he keeps his tools in, the edges dented from years of fixing what other people forgot. Come, I said, and I finally sat down. I didn't know his friend would carry a little black case that changed the way my hallway felt. They arrived with no music, no rush. Robert hugged me without words and handed me a paper bag with 2 light bulbs and a blueberry muffin. He never shows up empty-handed unless it's an emergency. The friend was a notary named Linda, a woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake, the kind that lets you know where your knuckles are. He told me you might want to sign a statement, she said gently. Your words, your choice. We sat at the table and I read aloud what I wanted, that I was of sound mind, that I had made my decision freely, that I had appointed Miss Parker my executor and placed my estate in trust for Robert, with special instructions for scholarships and a community kitchen that would bear my husband's name. I signed carefully, then Linda stamped it with a sound like a small, brave door opening. I felt taller even in my soft shoes. But I didn't know the next knock would come from uniforms. At 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. Not a ring, really, a press and hold like someone leaning on the sound out of spite. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 officers, a woman and a man, standing with polite faces and straight backs. Behind them, a third person in a beige cardigan held a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I opened the door halfway, with the chain still on, my heart counting, not trusting. "Evening, ma'am," the woman officer said. "We had a call for a wellness check." She tilted her head in that trained, practiced way. "Are you all right?" Behind her, the beige cardigan leaned in, like steam. "I'm from Adult Protective Services," she said lightly. "We got a report of possible self-neglect and confusion." I didn't know until that second that some words can bruise you without touching your skin. "I am fine," I said, and I stood up straighter even though I could feel the bones in my back complain. "Who called?" The officer glanced toward the street, where a gray sedan idled 2 houses down. I recognized the shape of the dent in the rear bumper. "No need to worry about that," the beige woman sang. "Could we come in for just a minute?" Robert stepped up behind me like a tree grows out of the ground at exactly the right time. "Is that necessary?" he asked, polite but made of wood. "I'm her family." The woman's eyebrows flicked up. "We always encourage family involvement," she said, like a teacher about to take your candy. The officer nodded at the chain. "Ma'am, if you'd prefer, we can speak here at the door," she offered. "Just need to see you're safe." I didn't know which safety she meant, mine, or the safety of a world that likes old women to be quiet. I opened the chain and let them into the entryway. Not the living room, not the kitchen, just the small square with the coat hooks and the rug that slips if you don't step carefully. "I'm Helen," I said, "and I'm fine. I cooked breakfast, I paid my light bill, I watered my plant, and I can tell you what day it is without looking at the calendar." The beige cardigan smiled wider, wrote something, and then asked me to count backward by 7s from 100 as if my life were a math trick. "No," I said, "because I am not a riddle." Linda the notary appeared in the hallway like a small miracle and held out the fresh stamp statement and the doctor's letter. "She is competent," Linda said, and the stamp seemed to shine in the light like it enjoyed being seen. The officer read both papers while the beige woman tapped her pen against her clipboard. "This will go in our report," the officer said finally, and I felt my lungs exhale, a piece of yesterday I hadn't realized I was still holding. But I didn't know the sedan had not left. When they were gone, dusk spilled down the street in long blue ropes, and the porch light, new bulb installed, glowed steady as a held hand. Robert tightened a screw on the railing that had been loose since last summer and said he would be back tomorrow with mulch. Linda hugged me and slipped her card into the bowl by the door. I washed the 2 cups we'd used and set them upside down on a dish towel, and the sound of water on porcelain felt like an old hymn I used to hum when I didn't know what else to do. I told myself I had done well, that I had won a small battle without raising my voice, and I believed it. But I didn't know the war would grow teeth overnight. At 11, when the house had settled and the new porch light made a circle of gold on the steps, my phone chimed. A bank alert. "Unsuccessful attempt to add external transfer account," it read. Then another. "Unsuccessful attempt to change beneficiary." Then a third, colder than the first 2. "Password reset request initiated." I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen table until the wood groaned, and I counted my breaths like pennies, slow, careful, one by one. I texted Miss Parker, who answered with the speed of a siren. On it. "Lockdown protocols." A minute later, she called. "I've frozen everything that can be frozen," she said. "Tomorrow morning, we go to the bank together." I thanked her and hung up. The porch light hummed softly. My house smelled like dish soap and worry. I pulled out the fireproof folder to hold the papers, just to feel their weight, like proof that choices can be solid. But I didn't know one piece of paper was already gone. The safe under my bed was shut, the dial set to the number only I knew, and still, when I opened it, the old will from 5 years ago wasn't there. The one that left everything to Claire with love and trust, and a little note in the margins I'd once written to make her smile on a future rainy day. The envelope where it should have been lay empty, a thin, open mouth. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the absence, the way you stare at a missing tooth with your tongue. Had I moved it? Had I given it to Miss Parker and forgotten? I turned the safe upside down onto the carpet and shook it, and coins and a pearl earring and an old photograph of Richard fell out, but not the will. I pressed my hand to the carpet so my hands would stop shaking. I didn't know that my doorbell would ring again, late and hard, before I found my calm. When I reached the door, the night looked heavier than it should for a quiet street. I checked the peephole and saw nothing but the curve of a shoulder in a suit jacket and the squared edge of a briefcase. I didn't open the chain. "Who is it?" I asked, and the voice that answered was a man's voice I didn't know. "Court courier," he said. "Urgent service." The word urgent scratched at my chest. "Slide it under the door," I told him, and a thick envelope with a county seal whispered across the rug. I didn't pick it up right away. I stood there with my hand on the chain and my heart doing arithmetic it didn't learn in school. When I finally bent to lift it, the seal felt warm under my thumb, like it had been pressed with a hand that meant to brand. I broke it open and pulled out the first page. The title at the top was long and sharp and colder than the bank alerts: Petition for Emergency Guardianship. Filed by Claire Jensen and Gavin Jensen. Hearing, Tuesday, 9 a.m. I read the line twice, then a third time, and the words didn't change. They had asked a court to take away my choices. They were coming not just for my money, but for my name. And then I saw the last page, their sworn statement claiming I was increasingly forgetful, unable to manage daily tasks, and subject to undue influence. My knees softened, but I did not fall. I looked at the clock over the stove. It was 11:47 p.m. I pressed Miss Parker's number with a finger that didn't tremble anymore. But before the call connected, a second envelope slid under the door, thinner than the first, like a knife. I picked it up and felt my throat go dry as dust. Inside was a single sheet, a copy of my old will, my handwriting, my note in the margin, and a sticky tab beside the signature line. Someone had found it, copied it, and now wanted to use it to prove the lie they had written about me. I turned toward the peephole, ready to shout into the dark, but the porch was empty except for the steady new light and the long shadow of a person walking away toward the gray sedan. "Miss Parker?" I said when the call caught. "They filed for guardianship." The line went quiet for one breath. "Two. Then we fight," she said, voice like a gavel. "We fight with paper and with light and with every person who knows the truth about you." I thought of Robert. I thought of Linda. I thought of the blueberry muffin sitting on the counter like a promise. I thought of the porch light burning exactly as it should. And then I heard something else, the soft click of my back door latch, the one that sticks if you don't lift it just right. I hadn't touched it since morning. I set the phone on the table, walked toward the sound, and felt the cool draft kiss my ankles. The kitchen curtain moved like someone's breath had brushed it. I reached for the doorknob and felt the tiniest drag of oil on the metal, fresh, new, not mine. "Who's there?" I said, and my voice didn't wobble. The porch light at the front made a clean gold circle, but the backyard was a sheet of dark. I tightened my cardigan belt and took one more step, slow and steady, and I listened the way you listen for your name in a crowd. That was when a phone buzzed in the dark just outside, one short, sharp vibration, like a warning before a storm. I turned the lock, set the deadbolt, and slid the wooden bar into its brackets the way Richard taught me. Old school, heavy, sure. Then I flipped off the kitchen light, so whoever stood out there would have to look at their own reflection in the glass, not mine. Silence dropped like a curtain. For a long minute, nothing moved. Nothing breathed loud enough to belong to a person. But the feeling didn't leave, the feeling that the night itself had grown a face and pressed it against my door. I picked up the phone again with a steady hand and called Robert. "Don't hang up," I said softly. "Tell me about the weather." His voice came like a warm coat, sliding onto my shoulders. "A little wind, Helen," he said, "but it'll pass." I stared at the back door and knew he was right about the wind and wrong about the other thing. The wind would pass. The rest wouldn't. Not yet. Not until Tuesday. Not until I walked into a courtroom and made a judge look me in the eyes and say my name the right way. Not until I found out who had their hands on my old will and their eyes on my life. And not until I opened the front door again and saw who had slipped the second envelope under, as if they owned the dark. Because as the clock ticked toward midnight, a third sound rose from the front of the house, a car door closing softly, a footstep on the gravel, and then a careful, almost sweet knock that didn't belong to a stranger at all. It belonged to my daughter. "Mom," Claire called, voice small, voice late, voice shaking. "Please. I need to talk to you. Alone." My hand hovered over the chain, and I felt the fireproof folder under my bed as if the papers could crawl to the door and take a side. I looked at the peephole and saw her face, wet cheeks, messy hair, a crack in the lipstick like a road on a map that leads home and away at the same time. But behind her shoulder, farther back in the dark, a second shape waited, still as a thought you don't want to think. I slid the chain and stopped with the metal caught halfway in the track, because I suddenly saw what I hadn't seen all day, the tiny red of a recording phone held low at a waist I recognized. If I opened the door without thinking, if I said one wrong word, if I let fear choose my next breath, they would have me on their story, not mine. I took a breath, counted to 10, and held the knob, firm and calm, while Claire whispered, "Please, Mom, please," and the shape in the dark didn't move at all. And then, from the alley behind the house, something else moved, a second pair of shoes crunching on old leaves, not hurrying, not hiding, coming toward my back door where the wooden bar now held like a promise. I turned my head just enough to see the kitchen shadow bend, as if testing the lock. My whole house inhaled with me and waited, listening to front and back, daughter and stranger, love and threat, past and future, all at once. My hands stayed on the chain, my eyes stayed on the peephole, my ears stayed on the leaves. And that was the exact second the porch light flickered once. Only once, like a signal, and then came back strong as noon, while a key I did not give turned inside my back door's bottom lock with a quiet, practiced click. My name is Helen, I am 78 years old, and I have learned that the deepest betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. It comes with the sound of a lock turning quietly in the night. That soft, practiced click from the back door still echoes in my bones like a drumbeat that refuses to stop. My hand stayed frozen on the chain of the front door where my daughter whispered, "Please," but my ears were locked onto the kitchen where a stranger's key was already inside my home. The porch light above my daughter flickered once, steady again, but it was enough for me to see her eyes dart, not toward me, but toward the shadow in the driveway where the gray sedan idled. Her lips trembled. "Mom," she whispered again. "Just open the door, please." But I could feel it. Her voice wasn't alone. It carried Gavin's orders like a letter she didn't want to deliver. I had two doors, two choices, and one heart that beat too fast for the thin walls of my chest. At the back, someone with a key. At the front, my only child asking entry with tears that looked real, but felt borrowed. I made the choice my husband once told me never to forget. Protect yourself first, or you'll have nothing left to protect them with. I slid the chain back into place and turned away from my daughter's knocking. The back door rattled, then stopped. Silence spread across the kitchen tile. My hand shook as I reached for the old cordless phone on the counter. Robert's voice was still on the line. "Still there, Helen?" he asked, calm as morning. "I'm here," I whispered. "They're in my yard." I heard him shift, heard the scrape of a chair on his floor. "Stay on with me. Don't hang up. I'm coming." But before Robert could even start his truck, something crashed against the back door. A shoulder, a fist, I don't know. The wooden bar Richard had built with his hands held steady. My whole house groaned, but it did not give. I grabbed the fireproof folder from under my bed and clutched it to my chest like a child. The second hit came harder, but then silence again. Whoever was there had realized brute force wouldn't work tonight. And then came the laughter. Not Gavin's this time. A softer laugh, higher, colder. A woman's voice. "We'll see you in court, old lady," she hissed, and footsteps retreated down the gravel path. My daughter's knocking at the front stopped at the same time. The sedan's headlights blinked on, and then the street went empty. I stood in the dark with my heart hammering so loudly it could have been heard 3 houses away. My hand shook as I set the folder back on the table. I whispered to the empty air, "You will not win." but I didn't know yet how far they would go to prove me wrong. The next morning, I walked into the bank with Miss Parker at my side. The marble floor gleamed under our shoes, and the clerks smiled too brightly, like they already knew why I was there. Miss Parker went straight to the manager's desk, handed over the documents, and her voice cut through the silence like a blade. We need an immediate audit. Access attempts last night. Trace them. Flag them. The manager cleared his throat, looked nervous, then turned his screen toward us. We already had a request, he admitted. Came through at midnight. Power of attorney presented. Looked legitimate. My stomach clenched. Ms. Parker slammed her palm on the desk. And did you verify with the principal? She demanded, nodding toward me. The account holder? The man swallowed hard. It was withdrawn before we could. Withdrawn. The word tasted like ash. But then he added, it didn't go through. Security flagged it. System mismatch. Account locked pending verification. Relief surged through me like air after drowning. They hadn't won, not yet. But the attempt was proof. They weren't guessing. They were moving. On the way out, Ms. Parker leaned close. They'll use the guardianship hearing now, she murmured. If they can't steal it digitally, they'll try legally. I tightened my grip on the folder. Then we fight legally, I whispered back. But in my gut, I knew courtrooms don't always honor truth. They honor paper. They honor performance. And Gavin was a man who knew how to perform. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house touching everything Richard built. Handrails, shelves, the porch light switch. His fingerprints lived in the wood, even if no one else could see them. I made tea at 2 a.m. and stood at the window, watching the street for headlights. The wind moved the trees, and shadows danced like restless ghosts. At 3, my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. Tuesday will be your last day with choices. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I wanted to delete it, but instead, I saved it. Evidence. Proof. Fear pressed hard in my chest, but underneath it, something else started to grow. Anger. The kind of anger that doesn't burn out quick. It burns steady, slow, like coal. The next morning, Robert came with donuts and a hammer. Thought you might like both, he said, setting them down on my table. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. They won't stop, Helen. You know that, right? I know, I said, pouring him coffee. He leaned forward. Then we don't stop either. He pulled something from his pocket, a small USB drive. Linda helped me copy the security footage from last night, he said. Camera across the street. Showed who was at your back door. My throat went dry. Who was it? He set the drive on the table, but his eyes told me before his words did. It was Claire. My hand trembled as I reached for the folder again. My own daughter. The little girl I once held against my chest when she was sick, the girl I bought winter coats for while I wore rags. She had been the one with the key. She had been the one at my back door. I whispered her name like a prayer gone wrong. And that was when Miss Parker called. Her voice was clipped, urgent. Helen, I just got notice. They've moved the hearing up. Tomorrow morning instead of Tuesday. They want to catch us unprepared. I closed my eyes, gripped the folder, and said the only thing I could. Then, tomorrow morning, I'll be ready. But I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how much of my heart would break before the judge even said my name. My name is Helen. I am 78 years old, and the morning of the hearing, I dressed myself as if I were going to war, not with weapons, but with the armor of dignity. A navy blue dress I'd kept for church weddings. My late husband's silver cross pinned near my heart. Shoes polished, even though the polish was so old it smelled faintly of dust. I stood in front of the mirror and whispered to my reflection, You are not weak. You are not confused. You know who you are. And yet, behind the words, my chest rattled with nerves like a window in the wind. Robert pulled into my driveway at 7:15 sharp. He wore his one good suit, shoulders straight, eyes heavy with both sleep and purpose. Linda, the notary, was already in the back seat, holding a folder thick with stamped documents. Miss Parker arrived moments later, heels clicking against the pavement like a drumbeat of certainty. We'll fight them with their own tricks, she said, sliding her sunglasses into her bag. But remember, judges don't read hearts. They read papers. Stay calm, Helen. Answer only what's asked. Do not let their words cut you. The courthouse loomed like a stone mouth waiting to swallow me whole. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and paper. People shuffled through security lines, shoes squeaking on linoleum. My heart slowed when I saw the courtroom door labeled, "In the matter of guardianship, Helen Carter." My name, my life, written as though I were already property of the state. And then I saw them. Claire sat on the bench outside the courtroom, her hair pulled back too tight, a folder on her lap. She looked smaller than she had the night before, her eyes red-rimmed, but her jaw was stiff, and I knew Gavin's hand had shaped her mourning. Gavin himself stood beside her in a gray suit, smooth as oil, speaking softly into his phone. When he noticed me, his lips curled into a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Helen," he said, as though he were greeting a client. "Ready for today?" I walked past him without a word. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The judge, a tall man with silver hair and glasses low on his nose, shuffled papers with a frown of mild annoyance. "Guardianship hearing expedited," he muttered. "Let's proceed." Claire and Gavin's lawyer, a slick man with a too-bright tie, rose first. "Your Honor, this is a matter of urgency. My clients are deeply concerned about Mrs. Carter's well-being. They have observed increasing confusion, unsafe living conditions, and susceptibility to undue influence." He shot a glance at Robert sitting beside me. "We have evidence that a non-relative is improperly benefiting from her estate." Improperly benefiting. The words landed like stones in my chest. Robert's hand brushed mine under the table, steadying me. Then it was my turn. Ms. Parker rose with her own folder, her voice sharp enough to slice through the lawyer's oily tone. "Your Honor, Mrs. Carter is competent. We have medical evaluations confirming her cognitive ability. We have notarized statements, video evidence, and proof of attempted financial fraud on the part of her son-in-law." The judge adjusted his glasses. "We'll hear from Mrs. Carter directly." My knees shook as I stood, but my voice did not. "Your Honor, I know my name. I know my address. I know the value of what my husband and I built. I also know betrayal when it sits across from me in this room." I turned my head toward Claire. Her eyes flickered, but she did not look away. "I may be 78, but I am not broken. I am not confused. And I refuse to be treated as if my life is already over." A murmur rippled through the small gallery of observers. The lawyer for Claire and Gavin cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, would you tell the court what day it is today?" I smiled, not because it was funny, but because the insult was so bare. "It's Thursday, April 10th. And I know it because I marked the calendar myself last night, right after I locked my doors against the very people who claim they want to protect me." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Locked your doors?" That was when Ms. Parker struck. She handed over the USB Robert had given her. "Security footage, Your Honor. Taken from the neighbor's camera at 11:30 p.m. last night. You'll see Mrs. Jensen, Mrs. Carter's daughter, attempting entry at the back door with a key." The courtroom went still. The judge inserted the drive. On the screen, clear as daylight, Claire appeared. Her face, her hands fumbling at my back door, the bar holding against her shoulder. Gavin's shadow lingered in the background. My heart broke all over again, but this time the cracks hardened into stone. "Mrs. Jensen," the judge said sternly, "do you dispute this is you?" Claire's lips parted, but no words came out. Gavin's jaw tightened. Their lawyer sputtered something about concerned children and misunderstood intentions, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. The gavel came down once. Motion for guardianship denied. Relief flooded through me, heavy and sharp, almost painful in its release. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the faint sound of Claire's breath catching in her throat. But then the judge spoke again. "However, given the allegations and the clear breakdown of family trust, I will be appointing an independent financial monitor to oversee Mrs. Carter's estate for the next 60 days. Consider this a safeguard against further conflict." My relief cooled instantly. Independent monitor. Another stranger with keys to my life. I wanted to protest, but Miss Parker squeezed my arm. "Take the win," she whispered. As court adjourned, Gavin stormed out, his face dark with rage. Claire stayed seated, her eyes glassy, staring at the empty screen where her betrayal had played out for all to see. For one fleeting moment, I wanted to take her hand, tell her I still loved her, still wanted her back. But the memory of that laughter, "She can't use that money anymore," burned hotter than my longing. Outside the courthouse, reporters with cameras had gathered, drawn by whispers of scandal. One thrust a microphone toward me. "Mrs. Carter, how does it feel to have your own family try to take control of your life?" I looked into the camera lens, my voice steady. "It feels like heartbreak, but it also feels like freedom, because today I learned that truth can stand even when love falls." The cameras flashed. Miss Parker pulled me toward the car. Robert opened the door for me, his face etched with pride and sorrow. But as we drove away, I noticed something chilling in the courthouse parking lot. Gavin stood by the gray sedan, phone pressed to his ear, his face twisted into a smile I didn't trust. And when he hung up, he looked directly at our car, mouthed 2 words, and raised his hand in a mock salute. "Not over." And I knew, deep in my bones, he was right. This was only round 1. My name is Helen, I am 78 years old, and the gavel's echo from that courthouse still rang in my ears long after we drove away. Guardianship denied. On paper, I had won. But deep inside, my bones told me what Gavin's smirk had already promised. This was only the beginning. He wasn't the kind of man to retreat quietly. Men like him don't know how to lose. They just find darker ways to win. That night, the house felt restless. The walls seemed thinner, the shadows longer. I set the fireproof folder back under my bed, checked the locks twice, and let the porch light burn like a soldier on duty. Robert called just before bed. "Sleep with one ear closed, one ear open," he advised, his voice carrying the weight of years lived through storms. "He's not done, Helen. And neither are you." I tried to sleep, but dreams betrayed me. I saw Richard's face, my late husband, staring at me from the head of the dinner table. His lips moved, but instead of his warm baritone, Gavin's mocking voice came out. "She can't use that money anymore." I woke up gasping, sweat dampening the sheets, the porch light still glowing steady through the curtains. The next morning, Miss Parker came by early with coffee and news. Her heels clicked against my kitchen tile as she set down her laptop. "He's appealing," she said flatly. "Filed paperwork this morning. Claims the judge was biased. That evidence was manipulated." She slid the screen toward me, showing the scanned documents. "It's nonsense. It won't stick. But it buys him time, and it keeps you in the crosshairs." I gripped my mug so tightly my knuckles whitened. "How much time?" 30 days. Maybe 45. I thought of 30 nights of porch lights, of shadows outside my back door, of envelopes slipped under like knives. 30 days of being hunted by my own family. Robert walked in then, carrying a toolbox. "Thought I'd fix the lock on your shed," he said, but his eyes searched Miss Parker's face. When she told him about the appeal, his jaw clenched. "He'll try everything," Robert muttered. "And if that doesn't work, he'll try something else." Something else came faster than I expected. That afternoon, while I watered the geraniums on the porch, a black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. 2 men in suits stepped out, their expressions blank, their movements rehearsed. One carried a clipboard. The other wore sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. "Mrs. Carter?" the one with the clipboard asked. "Yes," I said carefully. "We're with Sterling Investigations. Hired to perform an independent evaluation of your daily living conditions." Court ordered. Court ordered. The words scraped at my throat. "I haven't been notified of this," I said, clutching the watering can to my chest. "Your attorney will receive paperwork this afternoon," the man said smoothly. "In the meantime, we're authorized to do a walkthrough." Robert stepped out from the side of the house, hammer still in hand. Not today, gentlemen, he said. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made them pause. You'll wait for her lawyer. Then you'll come back. The man with the clipboard frowned. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this works, Robert replied, standing tall enough to block the porch steps. Leave. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the man scribbled something on his clipboard, tucked it under his arm, and the two walked back to the SUV. As the car pulled away, Robert muttered, "Private investigators. Hired hounds. He's digging for dirt." That night, I barely ate. I pushed food around my plate and stared at the fireproof folder. What if they twist everything? I asked Robert. What if they make me look helpless, unfit, like they want? Robert set down his fork. Then we fight with light, he said. We put cameras in every room, every hallway. If they want to watch, let them watch the truth. So that's what we did. The next day, Robert and Linda helped set up small cameras, by the door, in the kitchen, in the living room. Not to spy, Linda assured me, but to protect. If they want to call you confused, let's show them how clearly you live. By the third night, the cameras caught something. At 2:14 a.m., a shadow crossed the backyard. Not a raccoon, not a stray dog. A man. He tried the shed door, then the window. When he failed, he crouched low near the back steps, his face hidden. He stayed there for 10 minutes, unmoving, as though listening for my breath through the walls. Then he left. We turned the footage over to Ms. Parker the next morning. She looked grim. He's escalating, she said. This isn't just legal anymore. This is intimidation. But I already knew that. Because 2 hours later, the mail came. Inside was a letter with no return address. My hand shook as I unfolded it. The words were written in blocky, deliberate handwriting. Drop Robert. Drop Parker. Sign with us. Or the next time, the door won't hold. The paper smelled faintly of gasoline. Fear pressed down on me like a weight, but underneath it, a spark caught flame. They thought they could scare me into surrender. They thought 78 years of surviving storms, hunger, hard winters, and harder grief had left me fragile. But they didn't know I had one weapon left that they had never expected: the truth. The next morning, I walked into the local church where I had been a member for 40 years. I stood up after service, my hands trembling but my voice loud enough to carry. I need your help, I told the congregation. My own family is trying to strip me of my rights. But I am not helpless. I am not confused. And I will not let lies win. A murmur swept through the pews. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years leaned forward, their eyes wide. A few stood and clapped. Others whispered, I knew Gavin was no good. For the first time in months, I felt something lift off my shoulders. I wasn't alone anymore. But Gavin was watching. He always was. That evening, as Robert and I walked back to my car in the church parking lot, a figure leaned against the hood. Gavin. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled up, his smirk as sharp as a blade. Quite the performance today, he said smoothly. You always did love an audience. I tightened my grip on my purse. This isn't about performance. It's about truth. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Truth doesn't matter in court, Helen. Paper does. Signatures do. And I'll get them, one way or another. Robert stepped between us, his fists clenched. You're done, Gavin. But Gavin only smiled wider. Am I? Or are you? He brushed past us, climbed into the gray sedan, and drove away, leaving the smell of exhaust and menace behind. As I slid into my seat, my heart hammered against my ribs. Gavin had lost the first battle, but he wasn't retreating. He was sharpening his knives. And I knew, sooner than later, he'd cut deeper than ever before. The next few days were restless. I checked the locks 3 times each night, let the porch light burn long past dawn, and kept the fireproof folder within reach like it was a shield I might have to raise at any moment. Robert came by every day with new reinforcements, thicker bolts, motion lights, stronger locks. We'll make this house a fortress, he said, his hammer echoing like thunder in the quiet halls. Linda stopped by with fresh, notarized statements, Ms. Parker filed restraining orders, and still, The silence outside at night felt wrong. Too quiet. Too heavy. On the fourth night, the silence broke. It started with the cameras. A faint beep in the living room alerted me that movement had been detected near the back gate. My heart leapt. I stared at the monitor. Two figures, hooded, creeping toward the shed. One carried something long and metallic. The other carried a bag. They moved like men who knew they weren't supposed to be seen. I grabbed the phone, dialing Robert first, then the police. My hands shook, but my voice was steady when I said, "They're here. At the back gate. Hurry." Robert arrived before the police did. His truck roared into the driveway, headlights cutting across the yard like swords of light. The two figures froze, then bolted. One tripped over the garden fence and cursed loudly. That voice, I recognized it instantly. Gavin. The other ran faster, vaulting over the fence and vanishing into the night. But Gavin stumbled, caught in the beam of Robert's headlights, his hood falling back just long enough for the cameras to capture his face. He scrambled up and ran, leaving behind the bag. The police arrived 10 minutes later, their red and blue lights painting my quiet street in chaos. They searched the bag and found rope, gloves, and a crowbar. The officer looked at me grimly. "Doesn't look like they came here to talk." Fear sank into my stomach like lead. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. They were preparing to break in, to corner me in my own home. The police took a report, promised patrol cars would swing by more often. But as their taillights disappeared, I knew they couldn't guard me every hour. Gavin wouldn't stop because a report had been filed. If anything, it would make him angrier. The next morning, Ms. Parker came over with a pale face. "Helen, listen to me. I pulled court records from last night. Gavin filed an emergency petition, claims you're being unduly influenced by Robert. He's painting you as a confused old woman under the control of a manipulative man who's after your money." My stomach twisted. "He broke into my yard with a crowbar and rope," I snapped. "How is that concern for my safety?" Ms. Parker's lips pressed thin. "He doesn't care about truth. He cares about narrative. And sometimes courts believe the better story, not the truer one." I pressed my hands flat on the kitchen table. "Then we give them the better story." Robert leaned forward. "What are you thinking?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "If they want to strip me of my home, then I'll show them what it means when a woman refuses to be stripped of anything." That afternoon, I walked into the bank with Miss Parker at my side. "I want to withdraw," I told the manager. He blinked in shock. "How much?" "All of it," I said. He stammered, nearly dropped his pen. "Mrs. Carter, we're talking." 20 million, I interrupted. "I know the number. I know what I built. And I know what they want. So I'll move it before they can touch it." It took hours. Paperwork, verification, legal safeguards. But by sundown, the accounts Gavin thought he could leech from were empty, their balances transferred into a trust so tightly bound with legal knots that no outsider could undo them. The beneficiary remained Robert, with Parker as executor. But I added one new clause. Upon my death, funds will seed a foundation in Richard Carter's name, dedicated to scholarships for children from working families. When I signed the final line, my hand stopped trembling. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. If Gavin wanted a prize, he'd find nothing but an empty vault. That night, I sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, letting the steam warm my face. The porch light glowed steady outside. But then, a knock rattled the front door. Not a polite knock, a pounding, angry and demanding. I didn't move at first. Then I heard his voice. "Open the door, Helen." "Gavin." His words dripped with rage. "I know what you did today. You think you're clever? You think moving it makes it yours forever?" My hands tightened on the teacup. "You're old," he snarled through the door. "You'll slip up. And when you do, I'll be waiting." Robert's truck pulled into the driveway just then, tires crunching gravel. Gavin's shadow disappeared from the peephole. By the time Robert reached the porch, Gavin was gone, his words still echoing in the night. I leaned against the door, breathing hard. "He knows," I whispered. Robert touched my shoulder. "Let him know. Let him choke on it. You're not his prey." but I couldn't shake the chill in my chest. Gavin was cornered now, and cornered men don't retreat. They bite. And as I lay in bed that night, the fireproof folder tucked under my pillow, my phone buzzed with a new message. A photo. My porch light, glowing against the dark. Taken from the street. And beneath it, 3 words typed in all caps. Next time inside. I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind rattling the shutters felt like a hand testing the lock. I clutched the fireproof folder under my pillow, the way children clutch stuffed animals, and I prayed for dawn to come quickly. When the first gray light touched my curtains, I rose and brewed coffee so strong it bit at my tongue. Robert arrived at 7, toolbox in hand, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. I saw it too, he said before I could even speak. That picture wasn't just for you. He sent it to my phone, too. His jaw tightened as he set the box down. He wants us scared. He wants us rattled before court can save us. But we won't let him. We spent that morning reinforcing the house like it was a fortress from an old war movie. Extra bolts on the doors. Wooden dowels in the window tracks. Cameras adjusted to catch every corner of the yard. Robert even drilled plates into the door frames so no shoulder could splinter them easily. If he comes, Robert muttered, sweat on his brow, he'll regret it. But what I didn't realize then was that Gavin wasn't just planning to break my doors. He was planning to break me. By afternoon, Miss Parker called. Helen, she said, her voice clipped, there's chatter from the clerk's office. Gavin's lawyer is pushing for an emergency home inspection. They're claiming your house is unsafe, that Robert has filled it with hazards to isolate you. I laughed bitterly. Hazards? You mean locks to keep their greedy hands out? Ms. Parker didn't laugh. They'll try to spin it. You need to prepare for someone official showing up unannounced. And if they do, you must look calm, orderly, in control. I promised I would. But my promise was tested sooner than I expected. That evening, as Robert tightened the last bolt on the back door, a knock echoed at the front. This one wasn't Gavin's angry pounding. It was firm, authoritative. I looked through the peephole and saw a uniform and officer. Next to him stood a woman in a blazer, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Carter, the officer called. We're here for a wellness check and property review. Robert whispered behind me, don't let them frame it wrong. Stay calm. I opened the door, chain still on. Do you have documentation? I asked. The woman held up a form. Filed by Adult Protective Services. We've had a complaint about possible self-neglect and unsafe living conditions. There it was again, that word. Neglect. As if living independently, at 78, was a crime. Everything is fine here, I said, keeping my voice steady. Ma'am, the officer said gently. We'll need to step inside to confirm that. I hesitated. Every nerve in my body screamed trap. But Miss Parker's voice echoed in my head. Stay calm. Orderly. In control. So I slid the chain off and opened the door. They walked through the house slowly, peering at the locks, the cameras, the reinforced doors. The woman scribbled notes. Quite a lot of security for one elderly resident, she remarked. Quite a lot of harassment for my family, I shot back. The officer's lips twitched like he wanted to smile but couldn't. Mrs. Carter, do you cook for yourself? Manage your bills? Yes, I said firmly. Would you like me to recite the last 3 checks I wrote? They stayed 20 minutes. When they finally left, the woman looked unconvinced, but the officer nodded once, respectfully. You're fine, ma'am, he said quietly, almost reassuring. But as their car pulled away, another one slid into its place on the street. Gray. Familiar. Gavin's. He didn't get out. He just sat there, engine idling, lights off, staring at the house. Watching. I pulled the curtains shut and pressed my back against the wall. He's waiting, I whispered. Like a wolf outside the coop. Robert put his arm around my shoulder. Let him wait. Wolves get careless when they're hungry. But hunger makes them dangerous too. That night, I fell asleep in the armchair by the window, the porch light casting its circle across the steps. At 2:30 a.m., the cameras beeped again. Movement. This time, not at the shed. Not at the gate. At the front door. The monitor showed Gavin himself, no hood this time, no attempt at disguise. His face twisted with fury, sweat shining on his forehead. He pressed something against the lock, a key. My stomach dropped. He had a copy. The door rattled. The lock turned once, twice. The deadbolt held, but the key had slipped the first barrier. My heart pounded so loudly I could hardly hear Robert's footsteps as he rushed into the hall, bat in hand. The door shook as Gavin slammed his shoulder against it. "Open it, Helen," he roared. "This is my house now. My money. You can't keep it locked forever." "Police are on the way," Robert bellowed, even though he hadn't dialed yet. Gavin cursed, slammed the door one final time, and then the cameras caught him retreating to the gray sedan, screeching down the street. Silence returned, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shot. The next morning, Miss Parker sat at my table, her face pale. "Helen, this isn't just civil anymore. This is criminal. We'll press charges." But I knew Gavin wouldn't wait for charges. He wouldn't wait for courts. He was running out of patience, and desperate men with no patience are the most dangerous of all. That night, I checked every lock twice, then 3 times. Robert stayed over, sleeping on the couch with the bat beside him. I drifted in and out of uneasy dreams until a sound snapped me awake just before dawn. Not at the front door. Not at the back. Inside. Footsteps on the stairs. I froze, clutching the fireproof folder to my chest. The porch light glowed outside, steady and loyal, but it couldn't protect me now. Someone was already inside my house. I turned my head and listened. 1 step. 2. Then silence, as though he was pausing to listen for me. 2. "Robert," I whispered hoarsely into the dark, praying he was still on the couch below. And then, blessedly, movement. I heard Robert's feet hit the floor, then his voice, strong and sharp. "Who's there?" The steps above froze. Then came a low chuckle. A voice I knew too well. "Gavin." "Still playing watchdog, old man?" he sneered. "This isn't your house." Robert didn't answer. I heard the crack of the bat as he gripped it tighter. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, folder under my arm, heart pounding like a drum. I didn't know what was about to happen, only that Gavin had finally crossed the last line. He wasn't threatening anymore. He was here to take. The hallway light flicked on suddenly. Gavin stood at the top of the stairs, sweat shining on his forehead, eyes wild. His shirt was half untucked, and in his right hand he held a small black flashlight, not a weapon, but in that moment it felt just as dangerous. "Hand it over, Helen," he hissed. "The papers. The money. All of it. Before you embarrass yourself further." I stepped into the doorway of my bedroom, folder clutched tight. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You'll never get it. Not a dime. Not a name. Not a choice." His face twisted. "You think a piece of paper will stop me?" Robert moved into view below, bat raised. "It's not paper that'll stop you, Gavin. It's me." For a second, everything was still, the 3 of us locked in a triangle of hatred, fear, and defiance. Then Gavin lunged. He barreled down the stairs, eyes on Robert, fury in his stride. Robert swung the bat, but Gavin ducked low, slamming his shoulder into Robert's chest. They both hit the wall hard, picture frames shattering around them. "Robert!" I cried, rushing forward. The folder slipped from my arm, scattering across the floor. Gavin saw it and snarled, reaching for the documents with one hand even as he wrestled Robert with the other. "No!" I screamed. I leapt forward, grabbing the pages before his fingers could touch them. My knees cracked against the hardwood, pain lancing through me, but I didn't let go. I clutched those papers like they were my lifeline because they were. Gavin roared in frustration, twisting away from Robert and yanking at my arm. His grip was iron, his breath sour against my face. "Sign it, old woman," he spat. "Sign it or I swear." The front door burst open. "Police. Step away." 2 officers stormed in, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the chaos. Gavin froze, his hand still on my arm. For a heartbeat, the whole house held its breath. Then Robert shoved him hard, knocking him to the floor. The officers were on him in seconds, cuffing his wrists behind his back as he shouted and thrashed. "This is my house," Gavin bellowed. "This money is mine." The officers ignored him, hauling him upright. One of them turned to me. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" I shook my head, breathless, clutching the folder against my chest. "I'm fine," I whispered, though my knees screamed otherwise. "But he's not coming back here. Ever." The officers nodded grimly. "Breaking and entering. Attempted theft. You'll have restraining orders in place by morning." As they dragged Gavin out, his eyes locked on mine. Full of fury. Full of promise. "This isn't over, Helen," he snarled. "You can't keep it forever." I straightened, my voice steadier than it had been all night. "Watch me." When the door finally closed behind them, silence fell heavy and deep. Robert leaned against the wall, chest heaving, bat still clutched in his hand. I sank into the armchair, folder in my lap, tears slipping down my cheeks, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion, from relief, from the weight of surviving one more night. But as I sat there in the quiet, I knew Gavin's arrest wouldn't end this. He would find lawyers. He would find excuses. He would find ways to twist the truth until it suited him. The war wasn't over. And I wasn't done fighting. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Ms. Parker. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "Helen, listen to me. Gavin posted bail. He's already out." My chest tightened. "How? How could they let him out after breaking into my home?" "He has money," she said bitterly. "Money buys bail. Money buys lawyers. And his lawyer's already spinning the story." "What story?" I asked, gripping the receiver so tightly I thought it might crack. "That you staged the break-in," she said. "That Robert assaulted him. That you are unstable, paranoid, manipulated by outsiders." I nearly dropped the phone. He broke into my house with a key he had no right to. How could anyone believe otherwise? "Because," Ms. Parker said grimly, "he knows how to perform. And he knows how to poison the well before we even get to drink from it." Robert arrived an hour later, his face dark with worry. He carried the morning paper, folded back to the headline, "Local elderly woman in turmoil. Family feud turns violent." The article quoted Gavin's lawyer, calling him a concerned son-in-law who had merely tried to check on his mother-in-law's well-being when confronted by a hostile outsider. The outsider. Robert. The words twisted my stomach. "They're painting him as the victim," I whispered. Robert's hand tightened on the chair back until the wood creaked. "Let them try," he said, jaw clenched. "We've got truth. We've got video. We've got witnesses." But Gavin wasn't just fighting in court. He was waging war on every front. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with messages from old friends. Some asked if I was all right. Others asked if it was true that Robert was controlling me. A few, God help me, even asked if I'd lost my mind. Each word felt like another brick Gavin had stolen from under my feet. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I felt something colder than tears settle into me, a steely resolve. If Gavin wanted to drag me through the mud, I'd drag him into the light. The following week, Ms. Parker arranged a hearing for a restraining order. We walked into the courthouse, Robert at my side, Linda behind me. Gavin was already there, flanked by his lawyer and Claire, my daughter. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with shadows. She wouldn't look at me. She sat stiffly, clutching her purse, as though if she loosened her grip, her shame would spill out across the courtroom floor. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, folder in hand, and told the judge the truth. About the threats, about the photo of my porch light, about the footsteps in my home. Gavin's lawyer rose, smiling oily, as always. "Your Honor, what we have here is a lonely old woman whose paranoia has been inflamed by outside influences. My client, Mr. Jensen, has only ever tried to care for his wife's mother. The so-called evidence presented is circumstantial at best. Who among us hasn't tried to check on an elderly parent late at night? By breaking in with rope and a crowbar?" Ms. Parker shot back. The judge raised a hand. "Enough." I'll review the video evidence. As the footage played, the shadow at my door, the key in the lock, the shouting, the courtroom went silent. Gavin's jaw worked furiously, but he said nothing. The judge looked up. Restraining order granted. Mr. Jensen, you are to remain at least 300 feet from Mrs. Carter at all times. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. Relief washed over me, but it was thin, fragile. Because as I sat down, I glanced at Claire. Tears slid down her cheeks. She looked at me, for the first time in weeks. And, in her eyes, I didn't see loyalty. I didn't see love. I saw fear. Fear not of Gavin, but of me. When the hearing ended, she approached me in the hallway. Her voice trembled. Mom, why are you doing this? Why are you letting them, she glanced at Robert, turn you against your own family? I stared at her, my only daughter, the baby I had once rocked through fevers, the child I sacrificed meals for. Claire, I whispered, you turned against me the moment you chose a side. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She walked away, Gavin's hand gripping her shoulder like a leash. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, folder open, papers spread like cards in a deck. My husband's cross glinted under the light. Richard, I whispered to the empty room, I'm trying. But she's still our daughter. How do I fight her and still love her? The silence gave me no answer. But the next morning, an answer came anyway. Ugly, sharp, undeniable. The bank called. Someone had attempted another withdrawal. Not Gavin this time. Claire. Using my old will as proof of beneficiary rights. I nearly dropped the receiver. My daughter. My flesh and blood. She wasn't just standing beside Gavin in court. She was standing with him at the bank, reaching for what wasn't hers. For the first time, the tears came, hot and fast. Betrayal deeper than I ever imagined. Deeper than any court battle, any midnight threat. It wasn't just Gavin anymore. It was Claire. And as I sat there, shoulders shaking, one truth settled in my heart like ice. I would have to cut my own daughter out completely if I wanted to survive. The bank manager's voice replayed in my ears even after I hung up the phone. She insisted she was the rightful beneficiary. Said you were confused. We didn't process it, but Mrs. Carter, she'll try again. I sat at my kitchen table, the fireproof folder open, papers spread out like a battlefield. The tea in my cup went cold, untouched. For the first time since this war began, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, but from heartbreak. Robert came in quietly, setting a brown paper bag of groceries on the counter. He took one look at my face and knew. What happened? He asked. She went to the bank, I whispered. My voice cracked like old glass. Claire. My baby girl. She went to the bank with that old will. Robert sat across from me, his rough hands reaching for mine. Helen, I'm sorry. I pulled my hands back, hugging them to my chest. Sorry doesn't fix it. Sorry doesn't put her back in my arms at 5 years old, with her hair in ribbons and her eyes bright with trust. Sorry doesn't erase the way she looked at me in that courtroom, like I was the enemy. For the first time in months, I cried openly, shoulders heaving, tears dripping onto the folder that held the remnants of my life. Robert let me cry, silent and steady, his presence the only anchor in a storm that wanted to pull me under. When the tears finally slowed, I wiped my face with trembling hands. It's time, I said softly. Time for what? Time to finish this, I said, voice hardening. I've been holding on to the hope that she would turn back. That Claire would remember who she is. But hope doesn't protect a house. Hope doesn't keep wolves from the door. I have to cut her out. Completely. No more second chances. No more open doors. Robert nodded slowly. It'll hurt. It already does, I whispered. The next morning, I sat in Ms. Parker's office, pen in hand. The new will lay before me. Not just the transfer to Robert, not just the scholarship foundation, but a clause written in stark, undeniable language. I, Helen Carter, hereby revoke all previous wills and disinherit my daughter, Claire Jensen, and her husband, Gavin Jensen, from any and all claims to my estate. The words blurred through my tears, but I signed them anyway. The pen felt heavy, like a sword in my hand. When the ink dried, I felt both emptier and freer than I'd ever been. That night, Claire came. She didn't knock. She stood in the yard under the porch light, her face pale, her eyes hollow. I saw her through the window, and for a moment my heart leapt, the way it always had when she was little, waiting for me to open the door after school. But this wasn't the same girl. This was a woman shaped by greed and Gavin's poison. I stepped onto the porch, arms folded tight around me. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Please. We're in trouble. Gavin's bail conditions, the lawyers, the money. I don't know what to do." "You chose him," I said, my voice steady, but my chest aching. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm still your daughter." I shook my head slowly. "No. Not anymore. You were my daughter until you stood beside a man who broke into my house with rope and crowbars. You were my daughter until you walked into a bank and tried to steal the life I built. That girl, my daughter, she's gone. And what's left is someone I don't recognize." She sobbed openly, reaching for me, but I stepped back. The porch light glowed between us, a wall of gold she couldn't cross. "Go home, Claire," I said softly. "Go home to your husband. And tell him this: you will never get my house, my money, or my name. I cut you both out. Forever." Her face twisted in agony. "You can't mean that." "I already signed it," I whispered. "It's done." She staggered back, as if the words were blows. Then she turned and walked into the darkness, her sobs echoing down the street. I stood there long after she was gone, the porch light humming above me, tears streaming silently down my face. The next weeks passed slowly. Gavin tried again in court, but the restraining order held. The bank froze every avenue he attempted. And when news of his break-in and his lies spread through town, his name became a shadow people whispered about with pity or disgust. Claire disappeared from my doorstep, too ashamed or too broken to return. One evening, Robert brought me a small wooden box. "Something for you," he said. Inside was a plaque he'd carved himself, the Carter Foundation for Working Families. I traced the letters with my fingers. "Richard would be proud," I whispered. Robert smiled softly. "So would you." I realized then that my life wasn't ending. It was beginning again. Not with family who betrayed me, but with truth, with legacy, with the children who would one day go to college because of the money Gavin thought was his. I still miss my daughter. I always would. But some wounds can't be healed with apologies. Some wounds demand separation, so they don't swallow you whole. On the night I signed the final trust documents, I sat on the porch with Robert, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, casting its golden glow across the yard. "Do you feel safe now?" Robert asked. I looked at the light, at the folder on my lap, at the stars just beginning to show. "Safe," I said softly. "Maybe not, but I feel strong. And at 78, that's more than enough." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of betrayal finally lifting, leaving only the quiet strength of survival. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking to shadows. If Helen's story of betrayal, survival, and strength touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in what we hold on to, it's in what we finally let go.